Egypt. Why Ken's wrong. Egypt has a long and fascinating history. Find out how Ken Wheeler exploits public interest in the ancient kingdom to promote a pyramid scheme based on his antiquated metaphysical notions. There's been an advanced civilization in the Nile Valley of Northeast Africa for at least 5,000 years. Ancient Egypt was one of the most stable dynasties in history. Ken Wheeler shares his unfounded Egyptian notions on two subjects: the ancient language of hieroglyphs and the pyramids. Hieroglyphs were a mystery to historians for centuries because they fell into disuse around the 4th century CE. The Theoria Apophasis host claims to be an expert translator of hieroglyphs. According to Kentucky Ken, hieroglyphs were never the everyday language of ordinary Egyptians. Instead, he insists they're a mystical, symbolic language used only as talismans. The angry photographer seems to have picked up this bizarre occult notion from Neoplatonist writers preparing speculative texts during the Dark Ages. The Rosetta Stone is a monument written in 196 BCE with a routine inscription scholars call the Memphis Decree. The monument enabled Francois Champollion to decipher hieroglyphs because its engravers wrote the same inscription in hieroglyphs along with two known languages. The use of hieroglyphs on an ordinary monument with a routine public inscription proves that Egyptians used the characters for everyday business, which means they weren't some mystical talismanic secret. Egyptian hieroglyphs were a standard language and not a set of esoteric magical symbols. Over the course of their long history, the ancient Egyptians built at least 118 pyramids, almost always on the west bank of the Nile, symbolizing the land of the dead. Ken Wheeler has come across pictures of a relic called the Pyramidion of Ramos. A pyramidion is a capstone that goes on the peak of a pyramid. Ramos was a scribe who left a modest tomb in Deir el-Medina. Each face of his pyramidion is engraved with images and hieroglyphs. The north face depicts Horus the sun god seated and crowned with the sun and a cobra while holding an Ankh symbol. The south face depicts Horus in his alternative form as a falcon with the same sun and cobra crown. The east and west faces depict the sun worshipper raising his hands at sunrise and sunset. The artist uses the technique of overlapping at the edges to make the figures more lifelike. The Theoria Apophasis host has taken it upon himself to reinterpret these images. He claims, without evidence, that the overlapping figures tell one coherent harmonic perfection of metaphysical story. Kentucky Ken tells viewers that the shoulders of the sun worshippers represent old age. Shoulders in ancient Egyptian imagery represent the energy of movement. That's why the artists overlapped them, suggesting youthful motion. Kentucky Ken says the Ankh symbol represents death. It doesn't. Throughout the ancient world, the Ankh is a symbol for life. The angry photographer insists that the cobra on Horus's crown means life and rebirth. The cobra represents sovereignty, and it appears on all Egyptian crowns. Of course, the most iconic Egyptian pyramids are at Giza, near Cairo. As with hieroglyphs, historians lost track of precisely how the Egyptians managed to build such imposing structures. Archaeologists Pierre Tallet and Gregory Marward have made what scholars are calling the greatest Egyptology discovery of the 21st century. It's called the Diary of Merer. It's the journal, written in hieroglyphs, incidentally, of a construction inspector at the time of the Great Pyramid's construction. The entries detail how crews ferried shipments of about 30 3-ton blocks by boat every 10 days, delivering roughly 200 blocks per month to Giza. As for construction techniques, the historian Herodotus wrote, "This pyramid was made like stairs, which some call steps and others tiers. When this, its first form, was completed, the workmen used short wooden logs as levers to raise the rest of the stones." Diodorus Siculus tells us that the edifices were raised by means of earthen ramps, since machines for lifting had not yet been invented in those days. So the best explanation we have is that workers quarried the stones and then hauled them to the site in boats. Then massive crews of workers lifted the stones into place using a combination of ramps and levers. Although it's hard for us to grasp their motivation, hundreds of thousands of workers toiled for decades to build each of the 3 great pyramids of Giza. Ken Wheeler calls these verified explanations completely ludicrous. He subscribes to a discredited notion that crews cast the pyramid blocks on site using an ancient form of concrete. Dr. Deepayanjana, a licensed professional geologist and an expert on construction materials, has debunked this claim. As he puts it, "We are far from accepting, even as a remote possibility, a man-made origin of pyramid stones." Kentucky Ken also claims the builders used spiral ramps inside the Great Pyramid, which he argues is hollow. In 2015, the Scan Pyramids mission proved conclusively that there were no internal gaps or ramps inside the Great Pyramid. The Theoria Apophasis host needs to come up with these theories to justify his spiritual beliefs. As a perennialist, he believes that all of the world's religions and philosophies arose from ancient wisdom originating in Egypt. There's no historical or scientific evidence for this belief. Ken Wheeler's pyramid scheme is delusional. His antiquated reasoning has led him to monumentally wrong conclusions.